This podcast mini-series is kindly sponsored by Ellucian. Ellucian combines higher education expertise, focused innovation, and deep partnership to help universities navigate digital transformation. Serving more than 2,900 higher education institutions worldwide, Ellucian is your trusted partner for driving institution-wide success. Visit Ellucian.com to discover the complete integrated Ellucian software as a service platform and how it seamlessly connects people, processes, and applications across your institution. I'm Susanna Marsden, and welcome to Job Shadowing HE Managing Change mini-series sponsored by Ellucian. Each episode hears from guests about change initiatives happening in their organisations, their role within that, and some personal reflections on working in a change environment. My guest in this episode is Mairi Watson, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Hertfordshire. Mairi has worked in higher education since 2005 and before becoming Deputy Vice-Chancellor in early 2024 was Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education and the Student Experience since 2020. In this episode, Mairi offers a senior leadership overview of leading change, the importance of ambition, the scope for taking risks and being brave, and why supporting colleagues' readiness for change is such a vital part of leading change well. Mairi, welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining me today to talk about leading change. You're Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Hertfordshire, a post that you started in January this year. And prior to that, you were the university's Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education and Student Experience since 2020. Can you tell us a bit more about your HE career path and the remit of the role that you have now?
Thank you, Susanna. Yes, of course I can. My current role, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, is, much as the title might suggest, the deputy to the Vice-Chancellor, but that means that I'm responsible for the academic resources of the university and for making sure that we achieve what we've outlined in our strategic plan. Prior to that, as you say, I was Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education and Student Experience, which focused on a narrower remit, but was responsible for driving our performance in the key student-facing league tables, which we did reasonably well at during the time that I was PBC, taking us to second for postgraduate experience, 26 for undergraduate experience across the country, neither of which are insignificant achievements. And of course, during the pandemic, it was a very interesting time to lead that remit. Prior to being here at Hertfordshire, I was at the University of Northampton. I was the Dean of a Faculty of Business and Law there. And in previous roles there, Deputy Dean, Head of Postgraduate Programmes, Head of Corporate Programmes. And I started my academic career at De Montfort University as a senior lecturer and then principal lecturer in organisational behaviour, which means that organisational change is front and centre of my research interests as well as my working interests. So my day-to-day life is almost a bit like research in action. I never get away from it. So an interesting and varied career, always at institutions that have had widening access at their core, so focused on getting people who wouldn't ordinarily get to university exposed to the opportunities that going to university brings, as we know that has a chance of changing people's lives. People's lives do change after they've been to university.
And before you moved into higher education, you were a prison manager for just over 7 years. Now, this may be a unique career path in higher education. What motivated you to move into higher education?
Well, it is wrapped up with a question about what motivated me in the first place to become a prison governor. So I had studied law and then criminology at university. And I'm sure, much to my family's disappointment, sidestepped a career in law to go and work in prisons because, remarkably, I was quite shy and didn't fancy standing up in court or defending clients. So I thought criminology in prisons was obviously the place for a shy and retiring person to go. Not. And I spent 7 very rewarding and interesting years working in the prison service at various levels, from prison officer to prison governor, and then changed career tack, partly because my children were born, and I didn't want to work in a high security environment. I always worked in high security prisons, whilst also being responsible for young children. But it was an opportunity to follow a path that I had eyed for a while, and that was one of working in universities. And for all the differences between universities and prisons, there are remarkable similarities in that they are, big, complex organisations that are dealing with significant change and challenge on a day-to-day basis.
And so you've worked in higher education since 2005, and the world is now quite a different place to how it was then. What reflections do you have about the way in which universities have needed to engage in change across that time?
Well, I think in that time, probably the biggest change for universities has been the nature of the external environment. So in 2005, I think we probably moved a bit more like individual university institutions, with their own agenda and identity, and probably some connections with other universities like them across the country and across the world. Since then, of course, we've seen the introduction of the Office for Students, which brings us together much more as a sector, and the diversification of the lobbying bodies that represent us. We're a member of the University Alliance, which brings together professional and technical universities across the UK. Others, more familiar with the Russell Group or Million Plus or the other lobbying groups. But we do have that strong external identity now, and we're well placed in a very clearly defined sector now. And of course, the minute you are defined as a sector in a highly political country, then there will be more significant attention that has to be paid to the consequences of political intervention, which is really hard for universities, who are meant to be places of original thought and freedom of speech, challenging the norm, getting our students from school to employment, working with employers, doing things in imaginative and forward-thinking ways. But of course, our challenges at the moment are driven by that external political environment and the way that has shaped our fee structure, the way that has shaped the nature of recruitment, the way that has shaped research, the way that shapes our place in the local community. So although it's always tempting to say that things have never been as bad as they've ever been now, that the challenges you're facing now are harder than anybody's ever faced before, I don't think that's the case. But I do think this is a point in time where we can definitely identify the key external factors that are having an influence on the whole sector, rather than moving as individual universities.
Focusing in on your university, the University of Hertfordshire, it promotes itself as a university that never stands still and is a catalyst for change. Can you say a bit more about the vision and the strategic changes the university is focusing on? And also, I'm interested to know a bit more, and building on what you were just talking about there, how much scope you think there is in the sector at the moment for taking risks and being brave?
Gosh, 2 quite challenging questions to address, actually. But, number one, the easier one, I think, talking about the ambition of Hertfordshire. On our lanyards here, it says heart beats faster, and I think that really captures the energy and drive that we have here to make a difference in whatever area we work in the university. And what I've been struck by in the time that I've been here is that ambition and that drive and that forward acceleration. And it's acceleration, not just movement towards doing things better, and establishing our foothold as a university that is a bit of a disruptor. We're only established in 1952 as a university, or as a college, pre-university days, post-92, all of that stuff about the establishment of universities, which we still hark back to as a way of defining who we are. But, we were established in 1952 as an entity. We're young. Yeah, we are ambitious though, and we are driven to do better, and we are an outlier in many ways. We aren't what you would expect, and I think most people would say that when they cross the threshold here. We've just had over the weekend our Festival of Ideas, which brought many thousands of people from the local community onto campus to see us showcase the fantastic work that we do. You know, particles, comedy, magic, body language, psychology, robotics, wearable technologies, the NHS, you know, an amazing array of really outstanding areas of work here that are having an impact locally, regionally and nationally. And that's what, for me, it identifies the University of Hertfordshire. You know, it's not a straight road here. We are constantly moving upwards, and that's built into everything that we do. It's built into the very practical considerations of, you know, course design. It's built into the way that we engage with employers. It's built into the way that we design our research. It's built into the way we measure the impact of our research, and that makes it a very exciting place to be. And also, we're in the middle of transitioning from our old strategy, which focused on flexibility, community, and opportunity, to our new strategy, which focuses on excellence, expertise, and enterprise, which I think draws a very specific line in the sand for us to step over from being someone who has been successful to someone who is to a group of people who are being incredibly successful. You know, it's a building on the success and the ambition of our staff and moving us forward to the next stage in our development and claiming the excellence, expertise and enterprise tag as we elbow our way in past some of the competition. The second of the questions you asked was around what scope there was in the sector for taking risks and being brave at the moment. And that's a very important question. And we have pondered that with colleagues across the sector over the last 6 to 12 months, as so many universities are having to retract in order to stay financially sustainable. And it's a difficult position to be in as an organisation if you're forced to retract, forced to shrink in response to external changes. And that's the situation that very many of our strong competitors find themselves in. We're in a slightly different position, already having done some really serious work over the last 10 years to make us be an institution that is extremely financially stable, that is fit for the future. And we're constantly looking at ways of retaining that fitness for the future. And I think the only way universities are going to survive, and when we look back in 5 years' time and to see those who have survived, it will be those who have taken risks and been brave and looked introspectively at their operating models, looked introspectively at how they engage with communities, looked introspectively at the way that they engage with businesses. I've just come back from a trip to Australia where I was fortunate enough to visit 6 different universities out there and see the way that Australian universities are responding to the challenges of the environment. And I've come back with lots of good ideas that we might have to use here, we might want to use here.
There are many senior leaders in the sector, each of whom has their personal leadership style and approach. As we know, you've held a senior leadership position for a number of years, and you've led and are leading significant change. What would you say are the most important qualities for someone in a university senior leadership position, or maybe across a senior leadership team, to have in leading colleagues through change?
Well, this is almost a question for my colleagues, not a question for me, because I think, you know, one of the challenges of being a senior leader is being able to respond to and be able to communicate correctly with the teams that you've got. And teams don't stay still, you know, so right at the heart of being an effective senior leader, in my opinion, is to do your best to understand the people that you're working with. So, you know, not understanding their strengths, their weaknesses, their insecurities, their expertise, their contributions, and to know how best to build a relationship with each of those members of your team and in an effective way that gets the business of the organisation done. Now, of course, in a role like this, when I'm looking at the entirety of the academic staff as being my team, then the best thing I can do is communicate my ambition for the organisation in a way that resonates with the majority of people in the organisation. In fact, that was what my research on organisational change in prisons was about. I tracked 8 senior leaders and watched the way that they got their staff to engage in very, very difficult change. And it is about those conversations, those relationships that you build on a day-to-day basis that mean that when the big stuff happens, you don't have to start with a blank piece of paper. And there's a degree of trust both ways in that your teams will trust your ambition, and you can trust your teams to be ready for the consequences of that ambition. And that's not about being a great leader. That's about having great teams, and having the opportunity to build great teams around you who have the confidence to lead from their expertise. And certainly when you work in a university, however senior you are, almost everybody else in the university is at least, if not more clever, and most of them are more clever than me, so you have to be able to meet your team's expertise where it sits and understand how best to deploy that. So it's a complex job being a senior leader, but far less complex than the books would have you believe. It really is just about being someone who enjoys being with people, getting to know people, working out what motivates those people, and joining that up with your ambition for the organisation. And then, of course, on a very practical level, making sure that your people are recognised for their contribution and have the resources to deliver. I think one of the biggest barriers to change in large organisations is asking more without appreciating the consequences on that person's workload or on the resources that they need to do that workload. And that kind of, if we don't get this right, it will fail. Well, that's how we get this right. I need to be able to say, this is our ambition. Is that okay? Do you join me in that ambition? And my staff need to be empowered to say, I do. And then honestly, here are the resources we need to do that. And I'm a great fan of the phrase, if any of my colleagues are listening to this is the point at which they'll groan and go, oh, here she goes again. But, I'm a great fan of the phrase, it's not the passing of time that gets things done, it's the taking of action. And we can only take the action, the right action, if we've got the right resources. And that's not always about getting more resources. That's often about letting go of the things that you've done for a long time. The letting go is as hard as the taking on when you're setting off on a path of organisational change. And organisations are change. It's a fallacy to think that change is a special experience in organisations. Organisations are characterised by change, and change is part of the engine that drives success in any organisation.
Picking up on that people theme that you were just talking about there, in a promotional film for the university, your Vice-Chancellor says, the best people are not all the same. They don't look, sound or think the same, and they don't share the same lives. Now that's a really powerful statement, isn't it? That's clearly important to reflect on generally in our everyday lives. But when I heard it, it did also strike me that it's relevant to leading change. How important do you think agency is and getting that broad input in relation to implementing change successfully?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question, Susanna. And, there's a lot tied up in that statement from the Vice-Chancellor. We are all individuals and everyone comes to work on any given day, with a different journey there. I mean, literally a different journey there on the day, or throughout their life, a different journey there. And everybody brings a different set of expectations and motivations to the workplace. And that's why, for me, it's absolutely vital that you work in an organisation that broadly aligns with your values. I couldn't work somewhere. Most people can't work effectively somewhere if there's ongoing dissonance between their values and the organisation's values. And if you've got that connection, I mean, ours are very easily remembered, friendly, ambitious, collegiate, enterprising, student focused, right? So FACES. And most of our staff talk passionately about those values. And I think if you are in a place where you feel comfortable, you're not being asked to operate outside of your normal moral, I use the word moral lightly there, but normal moral boundaries, then you are going to be able to bring your expertise to the table and know that your contribution is appropriate. There have got to be boundaries to people's authority, but you've got to know that you can operate within those boundaries in a way that is, it allows you to be also opportunistic when great ideas come along. But agency is definitely a concept tempered by the degree of comfort that you feel in an organisation and the way that your senior leaders support you to bring your expertise to bear on the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis.
And in looking at the change that's taking place at Hertfordshire at the moment, and likely across any HEI, it's not just one change that's happening, is it? There are multiple strands. It's touching nearly all parts of institutional life. So you can have the vision and you can secure the agency, but how does an institution then create the organisational bandwidth and infrastructure to keep that momentum going across a period of time?
This is a really big question, but everything from does the strategy speak to your ambition? Does your structure support your strategy? Does the way that you communicate with people talk to your values? But fundamentally, this is about, for me, making sure that my teams are in a constant state of readiness for change. And it's exhausting, right? But you've got to. It's also exciting, and being sure that you are ready for change and looking for opportunities to change, to make things better, and feeling able to speak up when the changes look like they're going in a direction that won't help, but being able to accept that sometimes the changes that are underway might be uncomfortable for you, but are the right thing for the organisation. But for me, the key phrase is readiness for change, and we've talked a lot about that during the development of our new strategy over the last couple of weeks, and during the business planning round, which we're in the middle of here, which sets our budget for the next year, which is, how well have we equipped our staff for the changes that are coming? New strategy, new government probably, almost certainly new policies around higher education, new demands from artificial intelligence, needing to change our curriculum to match the external environment. You are in a constant cycle of change in a university, and that readiness for change has to be part of your orientation to work in a university. So in answer to the question, how do we create and maintain the bandwidth and momentum? It's about creating and maintaining a willingness and readiness for change and an environment that allows staff to contribute to that in an honest and open way.
There are some change initiatives that can be relatively quick to achieve, but reaching a position where that change is sustained and then shown in public measures, such as student satisfaction, employability, the ethnicity awarding gap, those can all take a lot longer. And I'm wondering, how easy is it to explain to a governing body, many of whom come from a corporate background, why that type of change can take longer in a university?
Well, you can imagine I spend quite a bit of time explaining the pace at which we're progressing towards our goals, being Deputy Vice-Chancellor here. So I think there's a couple of bits. There's two parts to this question for me. The first is, how do you keep people generally going when progress is slow? And I think that's a really, don't put yourself in a position of leading change if you're not prepared to answer that challenge on a daily basis. How do you keep people going when progress is generally slow? And that for me is making sure that there is a collective agreement on the ambition. So that's where the negotiation with the board starts, is, what is the ambition that we have for the university? We spent a bit of time a couple of years ago bringing everyone together around an ambition to be top 25%. Now, it's as simple as that. We did, of course, have a series of top 25% in what? Yeah, but that kind of easily communicated ambition. We want to be in the top 25%. Okay, so every day everybody, everywhere in the organisation has to be acting in a way that makes us look, feel and breathe like we are either top 25% or heading towards top 25%. And that kind of having a simple ambition that's agreed by everybody, that's appealing and achievable, is absolutely at the core of any mobilisation effort to improve performance. I think for the governing body, well, for everybody, because it's frustrating to everybody if you set a goal and you don't reach it, in all walks of life, it's really frustrating if you're not reaching your goals. Underpinning that, though, you have to be really honest about what has to happen for you to get there. There's no point in me saying, on Sunday I will run the Edinburgh Marathon, as my children are going to do on Sunday, one of whom has taken my space because I injured my foot. But, there's no point in me saying on Sunday I will run the Edinburgh Marathon without having a clear path towards that. And, that's, I think, the ultimate responsibility of senior leaders in the organisation, is to marry that ambition with the path that we're going to go on to achieve it. And of course, there'll be degrees of certainty, strategy, structure, resources, there'll be degrees of certainty, but even where there is no certainty, individuals will still be guided by that overarching principle of top 25%. I'm keeping the board on side. We've got a really experienced board here, some of whom are ex-senior leaders in universities. And so my job is to make sure that they have the information that they need to remain supportive of our ambition, even when they're not asking for it, so that they understand and they see the progress that we are making, and where we don't have evidence of progress, what we're doing to put that right. Because there isn't always best practice to follow. We do get ourselves tied up an awful lot in looking for best practice, but best practice is so tied to particular contexts that sometimes it's better to go with imagination and innovation and be bold and just try it. And I'm sure success comes as much to those who try and do things differently as it does to those who follow established practice. But in universities, as all big organisations, it's a balance between the two.
Finishing up our conversation today, Mairi, leading strategic change is clearly complex and therefore usually more of a marathon than a sprint. What keeps you motivated to reach that finishing line?
Wow. Well, it's a combination of everything I've said, I think. Organisations are change. I've said that. So, working in an organisation is a marathon, and inadvertently already used the marathon analogy earlier. But it's a marathon that you're making progress on a daily basis. So, just what keeps me motivated to reach the finishing line? Seeing the impact on our staff in working in an institution that's top 25%, that transforms their lives, their ambition, their motivation, the way that they talk about the university, the way that they feel coming to work, the way that they're committed to the university, the way that they want to stay with us and progress. So seeing the impact on our staff, seeing the impact on our students, and the impact that being top 25% has on their self-esteem and their confidence and their career trajectory, and then seeing the way that we are recognised and established now in Hertfordshire, across the region, the UK and the world. So it's those measures of impact that are central to any university's identity, but particularly to our identity at the University of Hertfordshire as one that is about excellence, expertise and enterprise.
Mairi, thank you so much for talking to me today and letting me shadow you.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me, Susanna.
Thank you for listening to Job Shadowing HE. The podcast was written and presented by Susanna Marsden, audio production and music by me, Rodri Marsden. More information about this podcast and previous episodes can be found at jobshadowinghe.com.